Hello everyone, I wanted to come on here and talk about another game I've been playing lately. I've been doing that a lot as I beat certain games throughout the year, just talking about them briefly, my opinions. And this, I can't believe it took me so long to play Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. It just took forever, partially because the PS3 until we moved into this place was never really hooked up. It was very rarely hooked up. It's just not a system either of us played very often, so a lot of the times I just didn't. I was playing other games on other systems, 360, the Wii, the Switch, PS4 even, so it just kind of, for some reason, was always on the wayside. Finally got around, though, the past couple of months to play Ni no Kuni, and I absolutely loved it. I had it sitting on the shelf, owned it, solely because I'm a huge fan of Studio Ghibli. I absolutely, my favorite studio ever. Some of my favorite movies of all time have come from them, and just their involvement and the art style, the music, the storytelling in this really intrigued me from the very beginning. And level 5, I've never had a bad experience with one of their games. A lot of them have not made it to my all-time sort of favorites list, but I've never had a bad experience. I've really enjoyed a lot of their games, and there's so much in here that is an amazing balance between those two creative entities. It really is just fantastic and got everything right in a way that strangely makes me a little less excited to play the sequel. I do want to play Ni no Kuni 2. We are going to grab the Ni no Kuni on the Switch for myself, and Amanda watched enough to where she wants to play it, so she's going to get it on the PS4 because she prefers PS4 over Switch, and then we'll get Ni no Kuni 2 on PS4. But yeah, talking a little bit of the reasons why it makes me less excited for the sequel. It sounds odd, but there were two distinct elements to this game. The very level 5 portions and these segments that are very Studio Ghibli, to where this actually could have made a pretty decent movie. I really think this could have been a Studio Ghibli feature. I really think the storytelling, the style of storytelling was strong enough and very much in their style, and just the way the animation was done, the music, it was fantastic. That was the part of the game that I fell absolutely in love with. I don't want to spoil any of the story because it's coming out again for the Switch for a lot of people that didn't have a PS3, because after the Japan only DS game that was remade for the PlayStation 3 and wasn't exclusive for that. So I don't want to spoil any of the story because for people that are going to play it for the first time on the Switch, because it is well worth not spoiling. It is fantastic. I love the storytelling because, again, it feels like a Ghibli movie. It is absolutely spectacular. I love going between the two worlds. It's so well done. The voice acting was phenomenal as well. A lot of the times, switching between Japanese to the English, which both were available. Sometimes the English voice acting is hit or miss, depends on the game. This was spot on, amazing, really well done. Every performance was great. I loved everything about this game from that aspect, the Ghibli aspect. Then the level 5 aspect was still really good, and there were familiar elements that there are little parts that remind me of, say, Rogue Galaxy, little things that remind me of stuff that they did with Dragon Quest VIII that was a little different from previous Dragon Quest games, things that reminded me of Dark Cloud. There were little things here or there that felt like a level 5 experience very much in the gameplay and the way the elements worked outside of just the storytelling and the presentation of the animation, things like that, that were really good, but the difference was that those were really good, like a 8 out of 10 plus, versus the Ghibli elements, which for me were 9 to 10 out of 10. Like, they're really, really well done, to the point where Ni no Kuni 2, just from what I've read and talked to people who've played it, it's very, very different, and there is less involvement from Ghibli staff. There's still character animation, and I believe also the soundtrack is still done, but overall it feels like the storytelling is less of the Ghibli style, and there's a real beautiful balance in here to where there are moments throughout the storytelling where it's almost as if you have to believe this fantasy world is real versus is this just a child and how they're processing grief, and it's all kind of happening in their mind, and there's that a little bit of a question of the barrier between reality and fantasy that is very common in a lot of Ghibli movies, to where I feel like that's broken in the second one, just from what I know the storyline, to where it solidifies it a little bit too much. So I really think that as the elements that I loved the most, I feel like if this was just a level 5 game and they did not have the involvement of Studio Ghibli, I don't think I'd like it as much. I think it would have just been a fairly good RPG. but those elements are what elevate this to being a spectacular experience and really, really worth grabbing. If you're watching this and wondering, should I grab the Switch version as someone who's been more of a Nintendo owner and has not been able to experience this before, it's well worth getting. It is a fantastic, fantastic experience from start to finish. I love the soundtrack. The soundtrack is spectacular. Yeah, it just visually, especially the opening town in our world that you go back to multiple times throughout the game, is that the most feels like a Ghibli movie more than anything. It's just fantastic. That, and of course, like the fairy grounds and things like that. It's so well done. Great sense of humor in the storytelling too. It has wonderful dramatic moments. Great sense of humor. I love having the actual book within your menus to where you can read some beautiful, interesting stories that you collect throughout the game. You go through your spell book and read all about the different spells and try and use it to solve certain quests. I won't spoil with a certain ghost that you meet throughout the game. You actually have to look and use your wizardry companion. You actually have to look through the book physically and find answers to things, and it's really, really interesting element that works very, very well. And everything from the alchemy to, I love having, there's kind of almost a Pokemon-esque thing with the creatures in the game that I thought was going to feel a little bit of a catch-em-all gimmicky thing, but it really wasn't. You can capture over 400 and really get into that if you want, and evolving with certain stones and feeding them treats to level up certain abilities. You can really get heavily into that if you want to, and if you don't, it's still something that you can just tackle lightly and still have a lot of fun. It's not a necessary component to go crazy overboard with it, but I think you might, because it's very addictive and fun really getting into. Mighty was still my favorite though from beginning to end. I just really liked him. Mighty Might, it's time to fight. Really just enjoyed that, and I loved the way that the combat worked with the switching between the actual characters and the balancing between that and sending out your creatures and really working through your party and giving different people different creatures and things and finding a great balance for the different environments. And really, it was very time-consuming in a fun way, that element of the gameplay, so I really enjoyed that much more than I thought I was going to. I thought that it wasn't going to be one of my favorite parts, but it really was. And so much about how the exploration of the world is structured and the different beats as far as the story, whether as it pertains to how the actual gameplay is structured, feels very classical RPG, but not in a stale way, again, in a very kind of classical, familiar way, without feeling that it is just a redundant experience, like you've done this before. It never feels that way, even though it has that sense of familiarity with the way the overworld is structured and things like that. It has this kind of heartwarming, homey feeling without feeling outdated. It really does a great balancing job, which I think is hard to do in some ways. I think very few RPGs now accomplish that. They either feel very retro, very new, or they try to do a balance in the middle. It doesn't quite work out. It just feels a little bit outdated. This accomplishes that wonderfully, the same way that something like Lost Odyssey does on the 360. Yeah, just overall a fantastic experience. I loved it. Pick it up on the Switch. Again, Ghibli, if you're a fan of that studio at all and you're not super into RPGs, just kind of a casual gamer, it's still worth getting. I know my brother-in-law and his girlfriend are going to grab it for the Switch, and neither of them are big RPG gamers, but they have been watching getting into a lot of Ghibli movies over the past year or so, and they're like, I gotta pick this up. It's well worth grabbing. It's definitely something that is a fantastic overall experience, and it is, I think this is overall my third favorite RPG of that console generation, of the Wii, the PS3, and the 360. I think the only things that I enjoyed even more than this were Lost Odyssey by a little bit on 360, and then Xenoblade Chronicles is my favorite game ever. So yeah, so overall, just a wonderful experience. I really enjoyed this, and yes, when it comes out again, not too long after this video comes out, actually about 2 months or so, when this comes out on PS4 and Switch, it's worth grabbing absolutely 100% if you've not played this yet.